Hello, and welcome to this video offering Eurorack modular patches to elevate your synthesis and make better use of the modules that you have. We'll be doing this with the newly updated Befaco utility range, and here's what's to come. This video is sponsored by Befaco, and here we have 5 newly updated or new modules from Befaco. Going left to right in this case, we have the mixer, Slew, MuDi, A+C and the quad Attenuverter. You may recognise some of these to updates of older Befaco modules, and generally speaking we have size and HP savings, changed layouts, improved circuits and performance, and better control with additional switches to more easily dial in the behaviour of the modules. Running down each module, here we have a 4HP 4-channel mixer for audio or CV, and this can also operate as a dual 2-channel mixer where you can output 1+2 and 3+4, or all 4 together. The Slew is now a 4HP module and has a precision pass-through for volt per octave and pitch work. It features separate rise and fall control times, and you have the ability to CV control them and select whether that CV controls the rise or fall or both. There's a curve control for the slopes, and edge detectors that give rising and falling side gate outputs. MuDi, the mult-ing or multiple divider, is a new module that's 2 HP and is a combination of a multiple and a divider. It takes a clock and a reset on an included TRS splitter cable, and you get 3 copies of your input signal there and a divide by 2, 4, 8 and 16 output. And this works with mathematical style clock divisions. There's then the A+B+C, which is a real powerhouse of utilities in 6 HP, and that has 2 identical channels of multiplication where you multiply the A input by the B input. You can think of multiplication as a ring modulation or a bipolar VCA control, and then that signal has an additional C input to add to that output of A times B. You can choose on the switch here whether the normal signals will normal down, or whether these 2 channels will actually mix together, and there's normalized voltages for offsets when you're not using those inputs, and range switches and inverting switches to easier dial in the behaviour of each control. Finally, we have the quad Attenuverter, which is 4 HP with 4 channels of attenuversion. The first input is normalized to 10 volts, and each input normals down like a buffered multiple, and rather than just being a standard mult where one in goes to multiple outs, each output here has a level control and an inversion switch for inverted levels as well. So you can use this as a kind of 1 in to 4 out router, or 1 to 3 in an independent channel, different combinations of the 4 channels there. So in this video the focus is really all about elevating your patches and synthesis with utilities. The ability to mix, scale, invert, control and modulate both audio and modulation signals is what makes modular format synthesis great. Modules like these literally make your system and your other modules better, giving you options to make more from what you already have. With that in mind, here's 8 patches that you can use with these modules or other utilities. Each patch has a focus on one of the modules, but multiple functions and modules are used in each. And there's takeaway ideas and tips throughout. The timing index is on screen and in the description below for you to skip around. So without further ado, let's dive in. So here I'm using A+B+C to create a really fascinating kind of complex phase FM-like sound out of a wave folder, to add some motion without even modulating the wave folder, and just end up at almost like digital synthesis type sound from completely analog sources. Now here we're monitoring the output of A times B+C here directly. I have two oscillators just to the left of the screen here, and I'm taking two sine waves into A plus B, so these will multiply together like a ring modulator, and as I increase the B level, we can see the green trace here. Ignore the yellow for now, and it's the split of this in the scope that we're listening to. And these two sines are hard synced, and they're giving us this kind of new wobbly waveform. And I have an LFO here. You can see that on this LED cable coming into C. So as I add this into the mix of A times B, this is like a DC offset. The LFO is pushing this bipolar waveform up and down. We can't hear it. That doesn't have any actual audible effect for us. So here I'll mute this sound in the mixer, and the split of it is going into a folder. That's this yellow output here. And I have the level of folding on this second channel, just so you can see when I move it on screen. The level of B there plays into the folding. But as I add the LFO that we couldn't hear making this wave move up and down, in a wave folder, this gives us symmetry effects. If I increase the actual fold gain, the fold level, you get a really rich tone compared to the static one. And here's that sound in an LPG that's been struck or plucked. Pushing that tone around, almost like a kind of PWM in the folding. So here we're having some fun with LFOs. If I turn all of this down, there's lots of effects in the mix, and it's a mixture of oscillators into a low-pass filter. The blend here, the output from A times B plus C, will modulate the filter's cutoff, and I'm using 3 LFOs as the inputs. 3 triangles just freely running, and as we times the 2 inputs, green and blue cables and traces here by turning up B, because these LFOs are free running, this multiplication process, which you can think of like a ring mod here, gives a unique, ever-evolving LFO. We can also mix in by adding in an offset, adding in C, which is this slower red trace input. So while A and B now are multiplying, we can just slowly push and pull them up and down, which is what's happening with that additional C input here. And as a final added bonus, as we have the switch to set this to mult-ing or mixing here, I'm on this mixed output, the second output, switch set to mix, and with this purple cable I have an audio rate source, so I can add a second C input if you like, a second offset. This time some really raspy, crispy audio rate filter modulation. So here's a patch that really focuses on the mixer here and mixing modulation. Of course, 4 channels of CV or audio mixing is great, but I'm using 2 channels of 2 channels, so 2 by 2, mixing here, where 1 and 2 mix CV signals to my filter cutoff, and 3 and 4 mix and output signals to the VCA for my baseline here. There's a few other things going on. I'm using the mult-ing divider here to divide my clock. I'm inverting in the attenuator. Some additional nice patches here to play with. So I'm just going to jam around before we get into it. do this all day. In fact, I have been doing it most of the day, playing around with this patch, which speaks to the kind of message of why utilities are awesome and why using them in your patches creates things for me that feel that bit more kind of evocative and interesting. But I actually need to make this video, so I better crack on with it. Now, the drums are nothing to do with the Befaco utilities here. But onto the bass, where the Befaco utilities are. I'm going to reduce the levels in the mixer. I'll just open up my VCA, which is letting through a square wave oscillator into the filter into a VCA. And the first thing I did was to get some movement on the VCA itself at the end of the chain. Again, basic VCO, VCF, VCA. So turning down manual level, turning up the influence of the CV. On channels 3 and 4, I'm mixing 2 envelopes. The first one uses the mult and divider here to divide my main 16th note clock. So divide by 2 becomes an 8th note. That's triggering this ADSR. You can just hear that's just pulsing the bass. And then using a quarter note envelope from my sequence, which comes up into another envelope here, I'm using the Attenuverter with the switch set to invert to create a ducking quarter note as a sidechain signal. And you can hear that really pumping there. So using 3 and 4 to mix signals for my VCA. Let's just open the VCA again and listen to what the filter's doing. This is a mixture of an envelope, and I'm actually using the slew here as an envelope. My short gate is the input, and I'm slewing the falling side. And rather than a triggered function generator, hopefully you can see that little hump of gate at the top. It's almost like a hold stage, instant rise, little hold and fall, and it gives those notes a good punch, especially with lower filter settings. And then clocking a random step for some sample and hold. And that kind of feels like a pattern sequence like signal rather than totally random as I'm sampling an LFO. And that combination of stepped signal creates a really dynamic filter movement. Add that in to my 8th note and sidechain VCA movement. And by inverting an envelope there in the Attenuverter, mixing modulation for the filter, mixing modulation for the VCA, we've got this ducking, highly kind of evocative, interesting, very rhythmic bass line. So here's a really nice patch for the slew, or if you have a falling edge detector, let's say part of a function generator. The bass here is really just some low-end ear candy. We can mute that for now. And my main drum sounds, the kick and hi-hat here have been sequenced externally, but the snare drum that I'll bring in now is being delayed in the slew, creating this off-timing, wonky, mod bap kind of loose hip-hop feel. It's this sound, if you want to hear it by itself. Now the green trace and cables here are my main gate, and if I actually just patch across to that, you can hear it perfectly on the grid. But patching back across, we're actually delaying by the gate length here. If I freeze the scope, you can see there as the green trace, the input gate goes low. This is where the fall output becomes active, the blue cables and trace. Now muting those, I'm taking the main output, so this is the gate signal, slewed with a little bit of rise and fall, giving it as an envelope shape, and that's triggering this noise sound. And you can hear it rising just into the beat, kind of giving us a soft reverse sound, if you like. Again, if I straighten this up, works perfectly fine against these swung drums, but it's nowhere near as fun as pushing that timing off. Now, if you had a typical function generator with, say, an end of rise, you could use rise time and a trigger to define a perfect gate delay. Here, this fall output is active on the falling edge of this gate, allowing me to sequence gate length for varieties in rhythm over time. So here we're going to use the Slew for volt per octave signals. So this is green tracing cable, volt per octave in, blue tracing cables, volt per octave out, and we can use rise and fall to add slew times to the rising or falling pitches. But the interesting bit here is the rising and falling gate outs. Think of them as a rising upwards in pitch detector and a falling coming down in pitch detector, and listen to how different this patch sounds when I play upper scale and back down again. When the pitch goes up, the rising output fires, and this fires an envelope to my filter, which is a saw wave, and that's panned left in the mixer. When I come down, the falling gate fires, that fires another envelope, the yellow trace one, and that envelope's open a wave folder on a sine wave. So if I just play around up and down on the keyboard, we get different falling and rising sounds, folding on the way down, filtering on the way up. I find this really fascinating, and the rise and fall times will extend these gates, but they're just triggering envelopes here, so it's not particularly important how long they are. But the rise and fall will change the slew rising and falling. I'll just hold down an arpeggio here. Let's add some rising slew. Let's just add a falling slew, so listen to the hard right pan folder sound in this case. Or the filter bending up. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And you could use this for lots of creative things. It could be that when you play a particular melodic pattern, you want it to be clean on the way up as the melody starts coming back down in pitch, whatever that melody is. Maybe you trigger a reverb or move a sequence to a different setting that changes your effects or tone somewhere, or envelope times that triggers some modulation. So here's a really quick patch, but something that's really useful here with the Attenuverter or Attenuverter is that it also works as a buffered mult. Here taking our input, which is an audio example in this case, and 4 outputs going to different parts of the patch, all then being mixed back together. If I turn each channel down, channel 1 is my main input here that's been multed down, copied down all of the inputs, and it's this warp core and mailroom, quirky glitchy voice. Anyway, turning that up in channel 1, that goes into my mixer and we hear it dry. Turning that up in channel 2, the copy in 2 comes out of this yellow cable to a patch. Kind of working like an auto wah, it's just an LFO to a filter. That copies to 3, and if I then output that, this is a send to a delay. And out of 4, this again sends a copy, this time to a reverb. And this could be modulation, it doesn't have to be audio, this could be where you say route an envelope around a whole patch. We can have some dry, some of this wobbly filter, fire off some verbs and delays. remove that dry copy. So very simple, the idea of a buffered mult and some attenuverters, but a handy mechanism for routing audio here, or as I say CV, you could distribute out modulation this way. So here's a quick look at the MuDi, or multiple or mult-ing divider. And this is a clock divider where we have a TRS input for clock and reset, 3 copies of the actual clock input, and then an additional 4 divided outputs. I'm using a reset here, hopefully you can see this blue LED on the cable. And this is driving my whole patch. Now if I remove the reset, this is a steady clock coming in. And the main outs, let's just unpatch actually. So we can see F, our frequency, our clock coming in. We divide by 2, 4, 8 and 16 here. If we take the copy of the clock, 16th note hi-hats, divide by 2, 8th note hi-hats, divide by 4, quarter note kick. By 8 for a snare, and 16 for a weird whoop kind of sound. Just pausing that for a second, you'll notice everything isn't on the grid. With clock dividers, you have mathematical and musical clock dividers. This is a mathematical clock divider here where, say, a divide by 2 needs 2 pulses to happen before it outputs, whereas a musical clock divider will output everything high on the reset and the first beat, so things like kicks and snares will be in time. If I put a reset in here, that's just at the start of the bar, and I hit play, notice that the kick drum doesn't happen straight away, and then the snare isn't on top of the kick either. It's on the and beats, the off beats, rather than the on beats. Now this is certainly no bad thing, it's just something worth noting, and in this instance where I'm just dividing a clock to make a basic beat, it does give us a different result. So here's a patch focused on the MuDi, the mult divider, and using that to divide down rhythms and create modulation and drive additional supporting layers and sources in a patch, rather than actually dividing clocks for rhythm work. Now the drums are separate to everything that's going on, or the main bits I want to show, so I'll mute them for now. And here's my main bass line. The green trace is my sequencer rhythm. It triggers the envelope that controls this saw wave into a filter and VCA. Now I'm using that as the actual driving clock for MuDi here. So this is dividing down rhythmic work, this bassline rhythm, rather than dividing a steady clock. And I'm taking the divide by 4 output here, which is the blue trace and blue cables, and I'm modulating the release on the envelope with that. So even though this rhythm is irregular, every 4th note here will have a longer release as I trigger an envelope and modulate this one. And attenuation, I kind of drive this point home all the time. Having control and attenuation is really important, so I'm just attenuating that to have a less dramatic effect. And I really like working this way, creating something rhythmic with a variety of modules or just a sequencer, but then using divisions of a rhythm to kind of accent notes with tonal changes. I'm then using the divide 2 output here to drive an additional supporting FM layer. So every second note in the bass line will get this kind of FM tone on top. But the divide by 8 and divide by 16 are driving tonal changes, enveloping things like FM amount and the kind of crispy digital waveform on this oscillator. So that on top of the bass line. And hopefully you can hear it's every second note in the saw wave bass has this FM on top. Additionally, there's a plucky arpeggio that's driven kind of elsewhere, but I am using the divide by 2 there to control the PWM. So bassline, which is the rhythm for MuDi. I should say the pitch sequence as well is slewed in the slew here. And I like this slightly different rise and fall time. You get a kind of whoop, like a nice quick rise up. But then a more labelled kind of fade down in pitch to that root note. So So main bass, release modulated by divide 4, supporting FM tone, driven by divide 2 and the 8 and 16 changing its tone, some PWM driven by the divider as well for this app, and the drums back in. If you've got this far in the video, drop a utility sync in the comments. What utilities do you like to use? And what are your favourite patches with modules like these? You can support my work on patreon.com/DivKid, where you'll gain access to plenty of exclusives and the DivKid Discord community, where we share and discuss patches like these and plenty more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!